So you shut down, you run basically to a safe place, which for all of us, it was government induced, and it was our homes. And at first we were disgruntled and we had concerns. Well, what about my job? What about? Or maybe you were the kind of person, because of your situation, where you thought, oh my God, what about my health? What about my life? And then we saw people getting sick, and then we saw people dying, or we were taken to the hospital. It was terrifying to watch people it was terrifying. And that really did a lot to reinforce a grounded, solid fear. So watching COVID unfold was literally like watching my 20 years of shut-in happen in this astronomically fast pace. And in August of 2022, my husband threw me out because I couldn't get pregnant. We had $60,000 that we'd thrown into IVF. I had 2 miscarriages, and I was 41 years old. And he threw me out, literally August 2022. I'm a COVID divorce. But instead of wallowing, and I had just gotten over my social anxiety, I was starved for anything, because I had just freed myself. Like, by the time I got out of my social bubble, by the time I got freed from my social anxiety, COVID hit. So for me, I experienced the reverse of the world. Everyone was being shut in, and extroverts were being locked up, and if you were an introvert, or if you already had a basis or a sliver of social anxiety, COVID exploded that. For me, I had the exact opposite experience. I had just spent 20 years in shut-in. I had just discovered my desire to be an extrovert and my social skills. And I was literally thrown into a situation where I could not access my comfort zone anymore, because I was thrown out of the house. And my comfort zone was my bedroom, was my house, was my gardens. So I had only one place left in the world where I felt safe, and that was New York City. So I went to New York City. And this is where a lot of people were like, oh my God, you went to New York City during COVID? Before you freak out, I have pictures of me sitting in the middle of Times Square at 9 a.m. empty. I was the only one there. So to be blunt, I had more social quarantine happening in New York City Times Square during COVID than most people had in their own homes, where they had to be locked up next to their family. There was no one around. It's the most weird thing. In fact, I didn't even know I was in Times Square. I just went for a coffee. I was sitting there lounging, and I had a friend saying, so where are you? And I'm like, oh, I'm just hanging out in New York City with a coffee. Take a look. And I snapped a picture, and I sent them the picture. And I have the picture. It's a coffee cup sitting on a table. And it wasn't until I looked at the picture and I sent it to her that I realized where I was, because the background was the ball and the countdown of it is 2020, and no one was around. It's a very surreal shot. I really just need to sell this picture to like National Geographic or something. It's a very surreal picture. So, and like I said, that iconic coffee cup, and then in the back is not just the ball, but the full countdown in Times Square. It was bizarre. And I stopped and I went, wait. And I looked around, and no one was there except Batman. Times Square of Batman. Batman of Times Square was there. He was the only one who was there. So I had more social distancing there. It was amazing. So back to social anxiety. It was, for me, this... I was starved. I was ready to get out and explore people while everybody else was shutting in. And I watched people turn into what I had just escaped from. And then there were people who were like, I'm too terrified to leave. And I just went, oh, I know what that is. I've been there. And if I were to break down being a shut-in and that mindset, it's you want safety and you want comfort. And that's what you go for. And you find your comfort zone. And there's 2 kinds of comfort zones, and I'm going to talk about those in a minute. And I think this is where a lot of people get comfort zones confused. There's comfort, and then there's comfort zone. And they are not the same thing. And people go to a comfort zone seeking comfort, but it's a trap. I'm gonna totally general agbar you on this. It's a trap, okay? There is a difference between comforting yourself, which you do need, and a comfort zone. And the problem with comfort zones is they are a cesspool for fear and anxiety. And anxiety is actually a consequence to fear. And that's something a lot of people actually, anxiety is a consequence to lack of control, not fear. So you have your fear, and then you have feeling out of control, and then anxiety develops because you feel out of control as a consequence. And the thing with emotions that are consequences is people put them before the horse. They think, oh, I have this feeling, therefore it is, when in fact that feeling is a consequence. And if you address the trigger to the consequence, which is feeling in control, this is important. This is like the key to getting out, feeling in control by taking control, by taking action. The consequence goes away. So there are two kinds of emotions. There is the trigger emotion, and then there is a consequence emotion. So fear is a trigger emotion. It is an emotion that evolves, that exists in a very primal state to preserve the body, preserve the mind, preserve the life. It is 100%, that's all it's there for. And when we are exposed to fear, a lot of things happen in our brains, a lot of things happens with our hormones. And it's supposed to be like little spurts, like that, oh, there's a tiger, run. Oh, there's a tiger, stay or fight. But that's not how it works, unfortunately. Sometimes you're exposed to fear so much that it trips in your brain and it stays on. And that's when fear becomes dangerous. That's when fear gets out of control. And that's what happened with COVID, is we all went into our safe place, government mandated, and we felt safe, even though we had a lot of concerns about, well, what's going to happen to the economy. But we were safe. And fear started tripping in our heads. And we started to associate very, very quickly, because of the situation, and it was justified and validated, that the reason why we felt fear was because if you step out your door, this invisible germ could get you. And we didn't know anything about it. We didn't know if we were going to die from it. We didn't know if it was legitimate. We didn't know if we could trust the government. We didn't know anything. We just knew that we were scared, and we were trying to process that as best we could. So they started lifting the bans, they started lifting regulations, they started controlling who goes where and what was going to be allowed for. And the extroverts who thought it was bullshit ran. They got out there. And we saw a rise in deaths, which just reinforced the fear of those staying inside. And there's one of two people listening to this video. Well, there's three people. There's the people who've already gone out, explored, and they're just curious. I'm not talking about you. I am talking about the people who are still in shut-in mode. Now, either you're there because you still believe there is a threat. And if you're not comfortable, if you're not there, okay. If you still believe there's a threat, stay put, do research. But if you feel like the threat is there, if you feel the threat is gone, and